There's something fascinating about how people cling to beliefs that claim to lead to truth while quietly contradicting it at every turn. Buddhism is often praised as the rational religion, calm, nonviolent, introspective, free from dogma. But peel back the layers, and you'll find that even here, there are ideas that make no sense at all. Ideas that sound poetic, but collapse under the weight of logic and evidence. Let's look closer at 12 of these beliefs. The ones that reveal Buddhism is not as rational as many think. One of the core beliefs is karma, the idea that your actions somehow shape your future life, or even this one through an invisible moral accounting system. Good deeds supposedly bring good results, bad deeds bring suffering. It sounds fair, but when you think about it, it's not even internally consistent. If a child is born into poverty or disease, Buddhism says it's because of bad karma from a past life. That's not justice. That's victim blaming on a cosmic scale. It turns suffering into punishment without evidence, and it removes compassion by turning empathy into judgment. Instead of asking, how can we fix this? Karma teaches they must have deserved it. Then there's reincarnation, the supposed rebirth of consciousness into another form after death. Buddhism claims there's no permanent soul, yet something continues on, shaped by karma. If there's no self, what exactly reincarnates? The logic collapses immediately, saying the process continues instead of the person doesn't fix it. It just hides the contradiction behind new words. And the biggest problem is, there's not a shred of scientific evidence that any part of consciousness survives brain death. Every known fact about the mind ties it to the brain. Destroy the brain, and the mind ceases. So what exactly is being reborn? Nothing observable, measurable, or coherent, just a comforting story about continuity that replaces truth with hope. Another belief is that desire is the root of all suffering. It's true that craving can create frustration, but the idea that all desire is suffering is a distortion of human nature. Without desire, there would be no curiosity, no progress, no creativity, no love. The desire to eat, learn, build, connect, these are not sources of suffering but of meaning. The problem isn't desire itself, it's imbalance, obsession, and delusion. To declare that extinguishing desire is the path to peace is to deny what makes life dynamic and human. It's not enlightenment. It's emotional numbness disguised as wisdom. Then comes the idea of nirvana, a state beyond suffering, beyond craving, beyond the self. But think about what that actually means. A state without feeling, without identity, without drive or emotion. That's not peace. It's erasure. If the goal of life is to stop being alive in every meaningful sense, what's the point? It's like striving to disappear and calling that liberation. If consciousness is so miraculous, why would its highest form be self-extinction? Buddhism also teaches the illusion of self, that what we call I is just a collection of thoughts, sensations, and perceptions with no real core. Psychologically, there's truth in realizing the self is fluid, shaped by experiences, but taking that insight to mean there's literally no self at all leads to absurdity. If there's no self, who practices mindfulness? Who suffers? Who seeks enlightenment? The denial of self becomes self-defeating, a philosophy that needs a thinker to think itself out of existence. And then there's the belief that meditation alone can lead to ultimate truth. Meditation is valuable. It calms the mind, sharpens focus, helps people understand themselves. But turning it into a supernatural tool that supposedly reveals cosmic reality turns introspection into mysticism. No one ever meditated their way to discovering DNA, gravity, or germ theory. Insight into one's mind isn't the same as insight into the universe. When Buddhism equates inner stillness with ultimate knowledge, it replaces reason with reverence. A subtler belief is the idea that monks and ascetics live closer to truth than ordinary people. Renouncing comfort, family, and pleasure is seen as purifying. But detachment from life doesn't make one wise, it just makes one detached. You can't understand compassion by avoiding people, or wisdom by rejecting experience. Life's lessons come from engagement, not withdrawal. The romanticizing of poverty and isolation has led countless followers to trade real living for ritualized emptiness. Then comes the Buddhist obsession with suffering as the first and central truth of existence. Yes, suffering exists, but to treat it as the foundation of life is like building philosophy on a wound. It breeds pessimism, disguised as insight. People are not defined by their pain. They're defined by what they create, feel, and imagine despite it. By focusing on suffering as the essence of reality, Buddhism reduces existence to endurance rather than exploration. Another strange idea is that thoughts can shape external reality, that mental purity or intention can influence outcomes. This belief overlaps with karma and mindfulness teachings, suggesting your inner state determines your world. It's a spiritual cousin to the law of attraction myth. But the world doesn't care about your mental calm. Earthquakes don't avoid monks, and calm minds don't stop cancer. Reality operates on physics, not thought energy. This idea might comfort some, but it quietly shifts responsibility for all suffering back onto the sufferer. Buddhism also romanticizes detachment, the belief that freedom comes from not caring too much, but detachment taken literally leads to indifference. Caring deeply, even when it hurts, is what makes empathy real. Love without attachment isn't love, it's politeness. The wisdom is not in abandoning emotion, but in understanding it. Buddhism's ideal of detachment risks turning humanity into spectators of life, rather than participants. Then there's the belief in enlightenment, that some people can reach a permanent state of perfect awareness and transcendence. It's presented as the highest goal, the summit of consciousness. But humans are not built for permanence in anything. Emotions, insights, and awareness all fluctuate. Claiming one can reach a timeless, unchanging state is an escape from reality, not mastery of it. The stories of enlightenment are unverifiable and self-referential. Only the enlightened can recognize the enlightened. It's an echo chamber of self-validation dressed as transcendence. Another common teaching is the endless cycle of samsara, birth, death, rebirth, and endless suffering until enlightenment. It's a cosmic treadmill designed to make people crave liberation while blaming them for every misstep. There's no evidence this cycle exists, yet it becomes a moral trap. Fear of bad rebirth keeps people obedient. Hope for enlightenment keeps them striving endlessly. It's control through mythology, just without a god. Finally, there's the belief that Buddhism is above belief, that it's not a religion, but a philosophy. This is one of the most seductive illusions. In reality, Buddhism is full of ritual, hierarchy, supernatural claims, and unquestioned dogma. The robes, chants, relics, temples, and bowing are not philosophy, they're religion in every sense. The claim that Buddhism is purely rational is like claiming astrology is just psychology. It works because it flatters intelligence. It lets people feel spiritual without feeling gullible. What's fascinating is how many modern people, even skeptics, fall for these ideas because they sound poetic or sophisticated. Mindfulness, detachment, karma, balance. They feel meaningful, but their vagueness is what makes them survive. They mean everything and nothing at the same time. And that's what belief systems do best. They thrive in the gray zone between metaphor and fact. When we examine Buddhism carefully, we see it's not uniquely enlightened. It's just uniquely good at hiding its contradictions behind calm words and gentle smiles. It doesn't shout like other religions. It whispers. It tells you there's no God, but there's a cosmic justice system. It tells you there's no soul, but something survives death. It tells you to let go of ego, yet promises personal enlightenment. The real tragedy is that these ideas keep people chasing something that doesn't exist. A perfect peace, a perfect state of being, a final escape from life's messiness. But life is not meant to be escaped. It's meant to be experienced, questioned, built, and rebuilt. The more we accept that, the freer we actually become. Buddhism, for all its elegance, is still a cage, just a quieter one, gilded with incense and silence. It promises freedom by asking you to deny everything that makes you human. And that's the cruelest illusion of all, because truth isn't in rejecting the self, or escaping desire, or meditating away thought. It's in embracing the chaos of being conscious, alive and uncertain. That's not suffering. That's the point. The irony is that Buddhism, which claims to end illusion, depends entirely on illusion to survive. The illusion that there's something permanent to transcend to, something ultimate to awaken from, something beyond the physical world that matters more than it. It's a story that comforts the intellect the way other religions comfort the heart. Even the image of the Buddha himself has become a contradiction. He's portrayed as a symbol of detachment and simplicity, yet temples overflow with gold statues, offerings, and prayers. People bow before his image, chant his name, and seek blessings, all in a religion that supposedly rejects worship. The Buddha becomes a god in all but name, while followers insist Buddhism is godless. The humility he preached has turned into a spectacle of ritual, and it's not just in temples. Modern versions of Buddhism have been repackaged to fit Western taste. Words like mindfulness, non-attachment, and awakening have been stripped of context and sold as self-help tools. But the underlying logic remains the same, that there's something wrong with being human, something to fix or transcend. It's a subtle form of self-rejection disguised as serenity. People are told that peace lies in detaching from thought, emotion, and identity, when in truth, peace comes from understanding and integrating them. Buddhism's promise of enlightenment is also built on circular logic. Only those who are enlightened can recognize enlightenment, and enlightenment can't be described, only experienced. That's the same structure as any mystical belief. It protects itself from criticism by being unfalsifiable. If someone claims to have reached enlightenment, there's no way to prove or disprove it, and that's how faith hides behind philosophy. Another problem lies in its moral system. Buddhism teaches compassion and non-harm, noble ideas but ones that crumble under the logic of karma. If suffering is always self-caused, then compassion becomes unnecessary. If someone's misfortune is their karmic debt, helping them might even be seen as interfering with cosmic justice. And in many traditional Buddhist societies, this has been exactly the justification for ignoring suffering. The poor, the sick, the disabled, all explained away as the results of past actions. It's not compassion, it's complacency with a moral mask. Even the idea of no self, the doctrine of anatta, raises a strange moral paradox. If there's no self, then who's responsible for moral actions? Who earns karma or suffers its results? The entire moral structure of Buddhism depends on a self it simultaneously denies. It's a logical trap that's been ignored for centuries because questioning it threatens the entire system. And when it comes to detachment, there's a human cost that often goes unnoticed. Detachment sounds wise until it's used to justify emotional distance, apathy, or resignation. Monks who renounce their families to seek enlightenment are praised for spiritual dedication, but what they're really doing is abandoning the messy, painful, beautiful bonds that make life human. Buddhism romanticizes withdrawal as virtue, when often it's just avoidance. This avoidance extends to suffering itself. Buddhism claims to face suffering honestly, but in reality it tries to dissolve it by labeling it illusion or by training the mind not to react. It teaches endurance, not change, mindfulness, not justice, peace, not progress. That's why, historically, Buddhist societies have often been slow to challenge social inequality. When you believe life's pain is spiritual training, not a problem to solve, reform becomes unnecessary. In that sense, Buddhism doesn't truly confront suffering, it spiritualizes it. It takes pain and turns it into a lesson from the universe. But the universe doesn't teach, it just is. Pain is not sacred, it's simply part of experience. Treating it as divine or purposeful only distracts us from reducing it in real, practical ways. There's also a subtle authoritarian streak hiding beneath Buddhism's calm surface. The reverence for monks, gurus, and teachers creates hierarchies of supposed spiritual advancement, where questioning authority becomes taboo. The idea that some have transcended illusion gives them moral and intellectual power over others, and that power, as history shows, is rarely used gently. Buddhist institutions have had scandals, corruption, and abuse, just like any other religion, yet they're often dismissed as exceptions rather than symptoms of systemic belief in spiritual hierarchy. Another illusion is the claim that Buddhism is inherently peaceful. While it teaches compassion, its history tells a different story. Buddhist monks have justified wars, supported nationalist movements, and even blessed weapons in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Japan. The image of peaceful monks chanting under trees hides the political machinery of religion beneath. When belief becomes identity, even the calmest philosophy can be turned into justification for violence. And perhaps the most ironic illusion is that Buddhism is the religion of reason. In truth, its strength lies not in rationality, but in ambiguity. It's flexible enough to sound profound to scientists and mystics alike. It borrows the language of experience and introspection, wrapping unprovable claims in psychological language. That's why so many people who reject traditional religions still find comfort in Buddhism. It flatters intellect while keeping the structure of faith intact. The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that Buddhism, like every other religion, is built on contradictions dressed as wisdom. It speaks of emptiness but builds temples, preaches detachment but demands devotion, denies self but preserves ego through enlightenment. Every contradiction is covered by metaphor, every logical flaw by poetry. But when we strip away the mysticism, there are still valuable human insights buried underneath. Awareness, empathy, reflection, and presence. These don't need karma, rebirth, or nirvana to make sense. They're just tools of consciousness, not gateways to another realm. The tragedy is that Buddhism takes these simple psychological truths and traps them in metaphysical cages, turning healthy awareness into spiritual pursuit. If Buddhism could be separated from its supernatural claims, if it could drop the karma, the rebirth, the enlightenment dogma, it might become what it claims to be, a philosophy of understanding the mind. But as long as it holds on to the mystical, it remains a religion pretending not to be one. And maybe that's why it's so seductive. It doesn't demand belief in a god, just belief in belief itself. It doesn't threaten you with hell, it seduces you with peace. It replaces divine authority with inner authority, which sounds empowering, until you realize it still traps you in a framework you didn't choose. When you're told that true freedom comes from extinguishing your desires, transcending your identity, and abandoning attachment, what's left of you? What's left to love, to create, to fight for? The Buddhist path to liberation ends where humanity begins to fade. Real freedom doesn't come from denying the self, but from understanding it, not from extinguishing desire, but from directing it, not from escaping life, but from living it consciously. The path to wisdom isn't withdrawal, it's participation, facing reality without filters, not reinterpreting it through metaphysical riddles. That's where Buddhism, like every organized belief system, falters. It replaces inquiry with instruction, discovery with doctrine. It teaches people to question the world, but never the framework doing the questioning. That's how illusion survives, not by being believed, but by being unexamined. So when someone says Buddhism is the most rational religion, maybe the better question is, why does reason need a religion at all? If truth is what we're after, why wrap it in robes and riddles? The moment we stop needing belief to feel at peace is the moment peace actually becomes possible. Because the only enlightenment worth seeking is the one that doesn't require faith to sustain it, the kind that comes not from detaching from life, but from engaging with it completely, thought by thought, breath by breath, mistake by mistake, not in temples, not in scriptures, but in the raw, unscripted experience of being. That, not nirvana, not rebirth, not escape, is the only awakening that makes sense. And maybe that's the part people miss most, that life itself doesn't need an ultimate purpose to be meaningful. It becomes meaningful the moment we stop searching for something beyond it. Buddhism's endless search for awakening only keeps the seeker trapped in motion, chasing a goal that dissolves the moment it's reached. It's like trying to grab smoke. The harder you grasp, the less there is to hold. The great irony is that many who follow Buddhism are already doing what they seek to do, being mindful, compassionate, aware, yet they're told they haven't arrived. They're told there's another step, another layer, another level of consciousness to reach. The system keeps feeding itself by inventing the next level. Enlightenment becomes a moving target, always just beyond the next retreat, the next meditation, the next lifetime. That's what makes it so effective as a belief system. It's self-sustaining. You can never prove it wrong because the promise is always internal, personal, invisible. If you question it, they say you're not ready. If you don't experience it, they say you're not pure enough. If you doubt it, that's just another form of attachment. There's no way out except to stop playing the game. And yet, the moment you do, you realize something simple. That peace doesn't come from surrendering to a system. It comes from letting go of the need for one. When you stop searching for the perfect way to live, you start actually living. When you stop trying to transcend your thoughts, you start understanding them. You see that meaning isn't something waiting to be uncovered. It's something we create, moment by moment, through choice, awareness, and connection. The Buddhist claim that all life is suffering misses the other half of the picture. Yes, there's suffering, but there's also joy, laughter, curiosity, love. They come from the same source, being alive. To deny one in the hope of escaping the other is to deny life itself. The challenge isn't to eliminate suffering, but to coexist with it, to balance it with all the beauty that exists alongside it. When Buddha left his family to seek enlightenment, it was seen as noble, but from another angle, it's a story about abandonment, about walking away from the messiness of love and responsibility in the name of purity. That idea, that the highest truth lies outside the human world, still shapes the religion. But what if the opposite is true? What if enlightenment isn't found in silence, but in sound, not in emptiness, but in fullness? Human understanding doesn't grow in caves or temples. It grows in conflict, communication, and creation. Our greatest insights come from living, failing, forgiving, trying again. Buddhism romanticizes stillness, but life isn't still. It's constantly moving, evolving, colliding with itself. To worship stillness is to worship death, and that's the quiet contradiction at the heart of Buddhism. It pretends to celebrate life while quietly encouraging escape from it. It praises awareness, but ends up teaching detachment from the very things awareness is meant to illuminate. It asks you to let go of suffering by letting go of everything that makes you capable of joy. Even the idea of mindfulness, so celebrated in the modern world, has been diluted into a kind of commercialized self-soothing. Corporations teach mindfulness to make workers more productive, not more conscious. Governments endorse it to reduce stress, not to inspire critical thought. It's become a tool for tolerating the system rather than questioning it. The ancient promise of liberation has been repackaged into a way to cope with monotony. There's also a quiet elitism built into the Buddhist worldview. Enlightenment is portrayed as something attainable only through long discipline, silence, and self-control, something for those who can afford the time and space to withdraw from the world. The poor and the struggling, those weighed down by survival, are told they must first be reborn in better conditions to reach spiritual progress. It's a system that, beneath its humble tone, divides people by supposed spiritual worthiness. Even compassion, one of Buddhism's most celebrated values, often gets lost in abstraction. It becomes something you practice rather than something you feel. You're taught to cultivate universal love for all beings, but in the process, the messy, specific, personal love that defines real relationships gets diluted. Compassion becomes performance, a calm smile, instead of a helping hand. And that's where the human spirit gets quietly drained. You start mistaking neutrality for peace, detachment for strength, silence for wisdom. You begin to fear intensity, passion, and emotion, the very forces that make creativity and connection possible. In trying to overcome the ego, you end up erasing what makes you individual. But individuality isn't the problem. It's the foundation of meaning. It's how empathy, art, and thought even exist. The goal shouldn't be to dissolve the self, but to understand it, to see how fragile and dynamic it is, yet still deeply real in experience. The illusion isn't the self. The illusion is that it must be destroyed to find truth. And so, what remains when all the illusions fall? When you stop believing that life needs a higher justification, a cosmic law, a spiritual hierarchy? What remains is the simple, unfiltered awareness of being here, awake, uncertain, alive. That state doesn't require enlightenment, doctrine, or belief. It doesn't need a temple or a mantra. It's the quiet realization that the world is enough as it is, not perfect, not eternal, not designed, just enough. And that's where genuine peace begins. Peace that doesn't depend on karma or meditation or rebirth. Peace that isn't the absence of desire, but the harmony of it. Peace that doesn't erase the self, but lets it live freely, honestly, and consciously. The irony is that this is what Buddhism was probably reaching for all along, a kind of radical acceptance of the moment. But somewhere along the way, it turned that insight into ideology. It tried to systematize something that was never meant to be a system. And that's the ultimate foolishness of all belief, trying to trap truth in words, rules, and rituals. Truth isn't a philosophy. It's an ongoing experience, a living process that changes with every breath. So maybe the real awakening isn't about rising above illusion, but about realizing that the search for awakening was the illusion all along. Because the world doesn't need more enlightened beings. It needs more honest ones, people who can face existence without myth, who can love without condition, who can see beauty without needing eternity to justify it. And when that happens, when belief finally gives way to understanding, that's when life, in all its fleeting imperfection, becomes enough. And that's when peace stops being something to seek and simply becomes something to live. It's strange how something that begins as a search for truth can end up becoming a sophisticated way to avoid it. Buddhism, like every other system of faith, began with curiosity, with one person asking questions about suffering, death, and meaning. But the moment those questions became doctrine, the moment the insights were frozen into teachings, the living spirit of inquiry turned into a cage. And the cage was made of beautiful words. Peace, awareness, compassion, enlightenment. Words that sound pure, but often serve the same old human need. Certainty. Certainty feels safe, but it kills exploration. It turns questioning into memorization, experience into repetition. That's why religions survive, not because they have truth, but because they promise safety in a world that offers none. Buddhism just offers that safety with softer language. It whispers instead of commands. It says, let go instead of obey, but the structure is the same. A teacher above, a doctrine within, a truth beyond, and a believer trying to reach it. If you strip away the aesthetics, the statues, chants, incense, robes, what's left isn't mystical insight. It's a psychological strategy for dealing with uncertainty. Meditation quiets anxiety. Detachment numbs pain. Karma gives a sense of order. Rebirth offers continuity. These are emotional bandages, not revelations. They make existence feel less chaotic, but they don't explain it. And that's okay. Humans have always built stories to make sense of chaos, but it becomes foolish when we mistake those stories for reality. When we believe that sitting still under a tree can uncover cosmic truths, or that the universe runs on moral balance. or that consciousness floats through lifetimes like a ghost changing masks. There's a certain poetry in these ideas, but poetry isn't proof. It can move us, inspire us, even comfort us, but it can't tell us what's real. The real world doesn't operate on poetic justice. It operates on cause and effect, randomness, complexity. Sometimes terrible things happen to kind people. Sometimes cruelty wins, sometimes there's no meaning at all. And that's not a flaw in the world, it's just how reality works. To face that without flinching is far more courageous than to escape into philosophies of transcendence. It takes more strength to live without guarantees than to spend your life chasing imaginary perfection. The Buddhist promise of enlightenment, like the Christian promise of heaven, is built on the same refusal to accept that this one fragile, unpredictable, beautiful existence is all there is. People say Buddhism isn't about belief, it's about experience. But that's not quite true. It tells you what experience means before you even have it. It tells you that everything is impermanent, that self is illusion, that suffering is inevitable. Those ideas become filters. Every thought, every feeling, every question gets funneled through them. That's not openness, that's conditioning. It's a subtler kind of faith, one that hides its dogma behind reflection. And yet there's something undeniably human in the longing behind it, the desire to find peace in chaos, to find structure in pain, to find purpose in being temporary. Those longings are what give rise to every religion, every philosophy, every myth. But the moment we start worshipping the tools we built to understand life, we stop actually understanding it. Buddhism tells people to let go of attachment, but maybe the only attachment we truly need to let go of is the attachment to certainty, to stories that promise answers, finality, and control. When we release that, what's left isn't emptiness, it's clarity, not nirvana, but awareness of reality as it is, imperfect, fleeting, unpredictable, alive. That awareness doesn't demand kneeling, chanting, or meditating for hours. It doesn't require rejecting desire or erasing emotion. It's simply the understanding that life is not a test or a cycle or a punishment. It's just a process, a momentary burst of consciousness in an indifferent universe. And in that small, brief flicker of awareness, everything that truly matters exists. Love, curiosity, connection, creation. None of it eternal, but all of it real. And that's enough. If you think about it, the very idea of trying to escape the human condition, whether through nirvana, heaven, or enlightenment, is built on a misunderstanding. We want to escape suffering, but suffering is the cost of awareness. We want eternal peace, but peace means nothing without conflict to define it. We want to transcend desire, but desire is what makes growth possible. Buddhism tries to solve life by erasing the variables, but life isn't a problem to solve. It's a phenomenon to experience. The mind wants neat solutions, but existence refuses to be neat. It's chaotic, inconsistent, sometimes cruel, sometimes miraculous. And maybe that's the point. That meaning isn't found in escaping that chaos, but in engaging with it, fully, fearlessly. When you stop looking for something beyond life, you start noticing life itself. The sound of rain, the texture of a voice, the taste of food, the warmth of another person's hand. These things aren't illusions. They're the only things that ever actually existed. They don't need cosmic explanation, and they don't need spiritual permission. They just are. In that realization, the endless chase for enlightenment fades quietly, because enlightenment stops being a destination. It becomes the act of seeing clearly, not through meditation or ritual, but through honesty. Honesty that admits we don't know why we exist, that we'll never find an ultimate reason, and that it doesn't matter, because the absence of cosmic purpose doesn't erase value. It creates it. Every choice, every kindness, every thought becomes precious precisely because it isn't written anywhere. That's what makes life profound, not its connection to eternity, but its disconnection from it. The awareness that every moment could be the last is what gives it weight. And so, when you hear people say Buddhism holds unique wisdom about life, maybe it does, but only when separated from its myths. The wisdom isn't in karma or nirvana. It's in the accidental truth buried under all of it, that peace isn't out there waiting to be found. It's created here in the acceptance of impermanence, not its denial. When you stop trying to escape impermanence, you stop suffering from it. And that realization, stripped of metaphysics, stripped of doctrine, is perhaps the only part of Buddhism that still makes sense. Everything else, the cycles, the karma, the rebirth, the self-denial, the hierarchies, they're just distractions dressed as discipline. Because in the end, the truest form of enlightenment is not transcendence, it's presence, the simple, humble act of being here, awake to the fleeting miracle of existence, without pretending it means more than it does, without needing it to. That's the kind of peace that doesn't come from belief. It comes from reality itself, silent, temporary, and endlessly enough. And maybe that's the quiet truth that all philosophies circle around but rarely admit, that there is no ultimate truth waiting at the end of a spiritual journey. There's only awareness and what you choose to do with it. The idea that life needs to be perfected, purified, or transcended is what keeps people trapped in illusion. Not the illusion of the world, but the illusion that they're ever supposed to escape it. When people say Buddhism offers freedom, it's worth asking. Freedom from what? Freedom from pain, from emotion, from desire, from identity. But those are the things that make existence real. You can't separate them from life without killing what life is. It's like trying to have music without sound, or light without contrast. The Buddhist promise of liberation becomes, paradoxically, a kind of death in disguise, an escape not from suffering, but from living. And when that's held up as the highest goal, people start to see their humanity as a flaw instead of a gift. They start to see love as attachment, joy as delusion, individuality as ego. But what if those things aren't problems to overcome? What if they're the very proof that you're alive? Desire, pain, and imperfection aren't signs of failure. They're the pulse of existence. Without them, there's nothing to grow from, nothing to learn, nothing to feel. The idea that peace requires emptiness is one of the most dangerous illusions ever sold. It tricks people into chasing a kind of spiritual anesthesia, and yet this chase continues because it offers what every religion offers: control. Buddhism just hides its control behind calm words and meditative silence. It doesn't threaten you with punishment. It seduces you with promise. It tells you that if you follow the Eightfold Path, practice right thought, right speech, right action, you'll free yourself from suffering. But that's still a transaction, a spiritual economy. Do this, get that, act this way, reach that goal. It's the same old system, just stripped of gods. But life isn't transactional. It doesn't owe us peace for discipline or reward us for stillness. It just unfolds, messy, unpredictable, alive. That's not something to transcend. It's something to witness, to participate in. Even the Buddhist obsession with impermanence, while accurate in a scientific sense, is turned into a spiritual weapon. Everything changes, therefore nothing is worth clinging to. But that misses the beauty in impermanence. The fact that everything changes doesn't mean nothing matters. It means everything matters more, because it won't last. Every moment, every person, every breath becomes precious because it's temporary. Buddhism tells us to detach from what fades. But maybe the wiser thing is to embrace it precisely because it fades. To love despite loss, to care despite transience. That's not ignorance, that's courage. It's the courage to live without cosmic guarantees. And that's what real awakening might actually look like. Not a monk under a tree disappearing into thoughtless stillness, but an ordinary person looking at the world exactly as it is, without needing it to be eternal, fair, or designed. Just awake enough to see it clearly, and kind enough to live in it anyway. Because the real enemy of peace isn't desire or ego, it's denial, the refusal to see life in its raw form, the insistence that there must be something beyond this. That beyond is what keeps people running in circles, lifetime after lifetime, metaphorically or otherwise, chasing the next illusion. And that's the tragedy hidden in beauty. Buddhism almost gets it right. It recognizes that suffering exists, that the self is fragile, that nothing lasts. But then, instead of accepting that as reality, it tries to escape it. It treats the human condition as a sickness instead of a state of being. It prescribes transcendence instead of understanding. But understanding doesn't come from erasing emotion. It comes from feeling it deeply and honestly. It doesn't come from silence. It comes from communication, connection, and compassion that's real, not ritualized. If Buddhism's goal was truly liberation, it would encourage people to live more, not less, to love more, not detach, to question even the Buddha himself, because any philosophy that discourages questioning its own foundation isn't wisdom, it's worship. And worship, no matter how peaceful it looks, is still submission. It's still the surrender of one's own reasoning to someone else's supposed insight. Whether the robe is white, orange, or black doesn't matter. The mechanism is the same. But the beauty of human reason is that it doesn't need a robe or a ritual to function. It can sit quietly in a room or stand loudly in the street. It can meditate or argue, reflect or build. It's flexible, adaptive, and endlessly curious. That's what makes it powerful. It doesn't seek finality, because finality is the death of thought, and that's what every religion, including Buddhism, secretly sells: the comfort of final answers. The idea that one day you'll arrive, that the struggle will end, that the questions will stop. But a mind without questions isn't enlightened, it's empty. And maybe that's the final illusion, mistaking emptiness for clarity. They're not the same. Clarity sees everything, even confusion, for what it is. Emptiness just erases it. To be clear-eyed about existence isn't to float above it, it's to be inside it, feeling every contradiction, every joy, every pain, every uncertainty, and still finding meaning in the midst of it all. Meaning that isn't written in any scripture, but found in the tiny, transient miracles of ordinary life. The laughter of someone you love, the kindness of a stranger, the ache of loss, the quiet moment when the world feels still and you realize that even in its impermanence, it's enough. That's not enlightenment, that's awareness. And awareness doesn't require you to stop being human. It requires you to finally be one. And in that sense, maybe the only truly foolish belief in Buddhism and in all religions is the belief that we have to become something other than what we already are to find peace. Because peace isn't hidden in temples or in mantras or in cosmic laws. It's hidden in the simple act of living fully, without illusion, without denial, and without the need to call it sacred. And when we finally understand that, when we stop mistaking silence for truth and stillness for understanding, that's when the search ends, not in enlightenment, but in something far more real, in the gentle, fleeting awareness that this, right now, is all there ever was, all there ever will be, and somehow, that's enough. And maybe that's the most honest conclusion anyone can reach, that enough is, in fact, enough. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Every religion, every philosophy, every ideology tries to offer something beyond reality, a hidden layer, a secret truth, a higher state. But what if there is no beyond? What if the search for one is what keeps humanity from actually arriving anywhere? Buddhism, like all systems of faith, begins with observation and ends with obsession. It starts by noticing suffering, impermanence, the restless nature of the mind, but then it turns those observations into commandments. Don't desire, don't attach, don't identify. It replaces curiosity with constraint and calls the constraint wisdom. But life doesn't need to be tamed. It needs to be understood. And understanding doesn't mean extinguishing emotion. It means learning to coexist with it. The mind doesn't become free by eliminating thought. It becomes free by seeing thought clearly and choosing how to engage with it. The heart doesn't find peace by withdrawing from the world. It finds peace by participating in it fully, knowing it will end. Because what gives life depth isn't eternity, it's limitation. It's the awareness that every laugh, every touch, every word has an ending. The beauty isn't in escaping impermanence. It's in loving despite it. Every moment we spend trying to escape that fact is a moment we don't live. The tragedy of Buddhism is that it confuses awareness with absence. It teaches people to watch the world pass by, rather than to take part in it, to become witnesses rather than creators. But awareness was never meant to be passive. It's the seed of action. Awareness without engagement becomes apathy, dressed as peace. And that's the quiet danger. When peace becomes the goal instead of understanding, people stop challenging what's wrong in the world. They sit in meditation halls while injustice unfolds outside, convinced they've transcended it. The focus turns inward, endlessly inward, until the world disappears into abstraction. And yet, the suffering remains, not solved, only reinterpreted. That's not enlightenment, that's resignation. It's surrender disguised as serenity. True awareness should make people more alive, not less, more passionate, not detached. It should make compassion urgent, not theoretical. Because the real work of consciousness is not to escape the human condition, but to improve it. The Buddha's story is often told as one of ultimate wisdom, a man who left behind luxury to seek truth. But maybe it's also a story about the limits of introspection, about how easy it is to mistake inner peace for universal truth. When you walk away from the noise of the world, it's easy to believe you've transcended it, but maybe you've only escaped the discomfort of being part of it. And that's what makes so many of Buddhism's ideas seductive. They offer relief without resolution. You don't have to fix anything. You just have to stop caring so much. You don't have to change the world. You just have to change your perspective. It's easier, cleaner, quieter. But silence isn't the same as peace, and perspective isn't the same as progress. The world doesn't become better by being observed. It becomes better by being engaged with, by messy, imperfect, passionate human beings who care enough to act. And maybe that's why real wisdom looks nothing like enlightenment. It doesn't sit above life. It sits inside it. It cries, it argues, it forgives, it rebuilds. It doesn't try to erase the self. It uses it not to dominate, but to connect. Because connection is the only real transcendence there is. The moment you see another person not as illusion, not as karma, not as temporary, but as someone whose experience is as deep and fragile as your own. That's where empathy begins. And empathy is more transformative than any doctrine or meditation. It's not found in monasteries or scriptures. It's found in the smallest exchanges, in listening, in helping, in understanding. The kind of awareness that matters isn't the awareness of your breath, it's the awareness of another's pain, another's joy. That's what makes us human, not detachment, but connection, not serenity, but sincerity. Buddhism teaches that clinging leads to suffering, but maybe suffering is just the cost of caring. And that's not something to eliminate, but to embrace. Because what's the alternative? To float through existence untouched, unshaken, uninvolved? That's not enlightenment, that's absence. The goal of life was never to become untouchable, but to become fully touched by everything, the sorrow, the beauty, the absurdity. So when you strip away the rituals, the reincarnation myths, the karma accounting, the silent temples, and the endless meditations, what remains isn't emptiness. It's a raw, vivid awareness that this world, imperfect as it is, doesn't need another escape plan. It needs honesty, kindness, and the courage to live without illusions. That's something deeper than enlightenment. It's authenticity. Authenticity doesn't promise eternal peace. It promises reality. And in that reality, there's room for everything: confusion, laughter, fear, desire, compassion. It's messy, but it's true, and that's the quiet rebellion, to stop chasing purity, to stop chasing perfection, and simply exist honestly. That's not the path to nirvana, it's the path back to life, because maybe the greatest awakening of all isn't realizing that life is suffering, but realizing that life, despite suffering, is still worth living. And when you reach that understanding, not as a doctrine, but as a living truth, you don't need enlightenment anymore, because you've already found something better, not eternal stillness, but fleeting conscious existence, not escape, but acceptance. And in that small, fragile acceptance of yourself, of others, of the impermanent world around you, you find a peace no religion can promise and no philosophy can define. A peace that belongs entirely to you. And that's the kind of peace that doesn't fade when the incense burns out or the chants stop echoing, because it was never borrowed from belief. It was built from reality itself. The world doesn't need enlightenment. It needs understanding. It needs compassion that acts, not meditates. It needs people awake enough to see that life, in all its imperfection, doesn't need to make sense to be worth living. And when we can finally see that, when we can stop searching for perfection, and start participating in existence as it is, then maybe, without even realizing it, we've already become everything we were ever trying to be, not enlightened, just awake.